Because I quit my job before we even knew we had the first grant.
Yes.
I'm not sure where that optimism came from.
Do you see some things differently now?
So we kind of went from being something that we felt was going to be a very narrow product for one market to now having basically an equal percentage of users from very different fields. Then the next step was, okay, how do we test if people actually need it?
Why would I hire a marketing person when I can do this?
This is the most important thing every marketer in a startup should be asking.
We were so early that we weren't even sure if we were a startup.
We should do this faster. And that, no, but we have all the time in the world. I'm like, no.
Are you a bit hard on yourself?
Welcome to the Growth Hour, the No BS podcast about growing your startups and scaling businesses. I'm Blanca.
I'm Zoya.
And today with us, we have the founder of Collabwriting, Sandra Idjoski. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
We're really glad to have you here with us because you have a fascinating story. You went from corporate to being an intern at a startup and then actually starting your own startup and being in a founder capacity. It's a little bit similar. I mean, I'm excited about it because I had a similar sort of journey. But before we kind of go anywhere and we talk a little bit about your path and what you're doing now, I would like for our audience to know what is Collabwriting and for who did you build it?
Well, Collabwriting is the simplest way to collect information anywhere online. And we basically built it as like this little knowledge base that tracks you wherever you go. And initially we built it for content marketers because I come from that field and I felt like the basis for our content was always good research. And then we started exploring more. So when we launched our product, we saw that there was a really good use case with consultants, with researchers. We even saw with startups who are doing a lot of research to prepare their pitch decks. So we kind of went from being something that we felt was going to be a very narrow product for one market to now having basically an equal percentage of users from very different fields, but that actually use it in a very similar way.
Cool. Actually, one things that we found fascinating is that, if I'm not mistaken, in the first year you doubled your users, but actually you've grown the same amount in just the last 3 months. Is that correct?
In the first year we launched, we grew pretty quickly. Like we grew from like 0 to maybe, I think it was 1,800, like 1,800 users. And then we came to 3,500 last year. But what's been even more exciting is that what we see this year is that we might double it in the next week or two.
Oh, wow.
Because we were 3,500 on like December 31st, and now we're already approaching over 6,000 active users. So
you grew 4 times as fast. That sounds.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a really, really exciting. And there's a couple of things that we've done that we can then chat about. But it's been really great to see, a year's time of work go into it, and now finally see those, activation, actions, user numbers grow.
In short, this is why what we are actually going to talk about. But if there is one thing that you would say that you did, that you probably learned throughout this year to reach double growth and then to go to 3 months to this double growth, what happened in these 3 months?
We realized that we had a lot of unnecessary friction, like little bugs, waiting too long to do something, things that users expected to be able to do but weren't, and we were focusing on like big things, like what's the next big feature we can do, but we kind of forgot that we have to optimize these steps first so that it's as easy as possible for users to...
Can you give us some example? Like what was that little fix? I think I can imagine it being something, but probably it could be something completely different.
Like something really little. We had adding hashtags for a really long time. But then we added, like if you add the hashtag and then we give you suggestions on things that you added in the past. We went from having like 20, 30 hashtags added a month to over 900 being added a month. So it was a complete difference in how people were using something that we had for a really long time. And then we had a bunch of those little things. Like one big thing, for example, that happened was now not just being available on desktop, but now for the first time being available on mobile. We've seen just in the past week that we've been live, big growth with that, but there were like these all little things that contributed to that.
Awesome. And for example, how much it took you to build this feature for example, let's use that one with tags.
It was like one sprint. We do it like bi-weekly sprints. So that's what we use. And it was, some time for planning by my co-founder. He's the technical kind of lead in our team. And then it was basically like, I think 2 weeks plus maybe a little bit of time to do it. And it was just something that we knew was causing friction, but we couldn't imagine how big of an impact it would have, on the actual numbers, on the usability.
I want to just take a step back a little bit, because now we're getting into like real tactic, and I definitely want to talk about it and kind of what worked, what didn't. But just in terms of when you've just started, how did you envision, like you said a little bit, kind of you had a different idea of what your target audience would be, but how did you go from like, oh, I have this idea that I think would be useful, to actually, deciding what product to build, how to build it, how to sell it? Like, can you tell us a little bit about these early days and how you went about building the product that people actually want to use?
It was actually quite a process. I mean, the idea for Collabwriting was in my head for about a year before we even just started doing anything with it. And me and my co-founder, we talk about it occasionally. My now co-founder, I was the employee in his startup at that time.
Oh, cool.
So we would talk about it, and because the previous startup was acquired, we were thinking about potentially doing something in the future, some type of startup, something to continue working together, because we had a great working relationship. And we were kind of going back and forth on what would make the most sense. And what in the end kind of why Collabwriting won is because there was this opportunity for female founders in Germany to go and pitch like an early stage idea. And when I was thinking about what should we apply for, because we were thinking about different ideas, I decided to go with Collabwriting because it was the most familiar to me. I knew the problem. I knew what I envisioned could solve my problem. Like there was this idea, and I felt the most comfortable presenting it. And then we took like little baby steps. First, it was, how feasible this is, because, now there's all of these things happening with AI, but this was 3-4 years ago. And a tool like this where you could, have true collaboration on content online wasn't really there. Like you had highlighters, you had collaboration tools, but bringing them together wasn't really there. And what was really important to me at the time was being able to locate the information that I found. Yes. And why that was important is because I would go through so much data. Highlights alone were not kind of cutting it for me, because I wanted to fact check things that my content writer was doing. So, just having this highlight and it was on some page still meant manual labor. And when we established that, okay, we could do this, at least in theory, then the next step was, okay, how do we test if people actually need it? So one of the first things was that pitch in Berlin. And I actually got some really good feedback. I mean, of course, we didn't win. Like, we were a week old. We had barely a static website and a presentation that was
You were early even for an early stage.
Yeah, we were so early that we weren't even sure if we were a startup. So it was just, kind of to test the ideas to see if there was space for this. And then the next step was we applied, not even applied, we just decided to do winter school by YC. At that time, I'm pretty sure it's still just completely open. Anybody can just roll in and start listening to the lectures. But what was even better for us were these like online sessions that we would have with other potential founders from all over the world. And then we will all talk about our ideas. And then what we had people do was download our extension when we were on the call to see how they were actually behaving with it. So they would share the screen, we would see how they were doing, we would see if things made sense, if there was that, little aha moment, oh, wow, I really like this, or was it something, oh, this is okay. So that was kind of the first testing ground to see, is this a tool that somebody would actually like to use? Then we applied for some grants, so we got a little bit of funding, and then kind of went from there.
And at that point, were mostly the users were like content writers and like content marketers, or
startup founders?
There were some startup founders, but there was also some marketing people. But in those early days, people that we primarily spoke to in terms of those user interviews were content marketers and people in marketing. But then because, we had a bit of like grant money, but we couldn't really spend it on marketing. So we were trying to use everything that was available out of like the free tools we had. And then we both saw like organic registration started coming in from like consulting or research. And then once we launched on first Product Hunt and then AppSumo, we saw that it was almost like an even split. Out of like 350 licenses on AppSumo, it was literally almost an even split between content marketers, consultants, and researchers. So that was kind of when we knew that this wasn't just like a single industry product. Yes, we needed focus in the early days to be able to actually do something productive, not go too wide, but that this could probably grow a bit bigger than we expected.
Yeah, for me, it was really, gotta say that as a consultant and as a researcher, I was always questioning why can't somehow the content I copy, why can't it just have a tool where I immediately know where it's from, I can click back to it, but I have to, name the source, name the link, or like you always have to think back, and when you're moving fast, you don't even know if you're gonna use it. It can be very complicated. So, but it's interesting because it started with validating a product in a small niche user base that you already knew exists. And then it made, like through the data, you learned that there are others with similar pains. That's actually a good sign.
Yeah, it was basically through feedback from people. Whenever we would speak to people, they were like, yes, this is great for this, but I also think there's a chance for this, because we didn't really know the process for how it looked for consultants, how it looked for researchers, how it looked for other teams. And then when we started talking to people, they would always be like, this is probably unique to us, to our industry. And then you would hear the exact same thing. Yeah. Because even though it doesn't sound similar, that initial stage of producing anything, whether it's like a blog, a social media post, a research paper, it's actually very similar. You're browsing through a lot of data, trying to find unique insights and unique ideas. And you're usually kind of trying to attach your own thoughts to it. So,
and Sandra, when you were starting out, so you and Ivan, what I like is very common in startup stories, and even when we started this podcast and other things, it's this sense of urgency. Like, oh, there is this pitch competition, so let's build everything for it. It really helps you like do everything in a week. But when you have like these loose timelines for some things, things tend to prolong. But were you still working at this startup when you started?
For a very short time. Like we started thinking about the idea, maybe like fully committing to the idea, maybe somewhere in December. And I think already by March, I was fully transferred to Collabwriting. We went very quickly and we were very optimistic. Like looking back now, I'm not sure where that optimism came from, because I quit my job before we even knew we had the first grant in. So we kind of went all in basically to just, try and see if this works. And I'm not sure where we got the bravery to do it at that time, but
that's what they call, uninformed optimism for entrepreneurs. But I'm curious about the numbers. Like, what maybe gave you this confidence? Like, how many people at that point did you talk to in terms of your potential customers or customers? And at which point were you like, okay, there is really something in this, like we feel the pull?
We validated the problem. That's what
I think it was at least 20, 30 people that we spoke to, or even more through these sessions. But I think that for us, I know this isn't common advice, but we personally felt like this was a really good idea and good product to have. Not just because, we wanted to build a product, but because we really felt there was a problem. We really felt like there was just a piece missing. Like I worked in marketing for 5-6 years before, maybe a bit longer if we count the years when I was studying. And I could optimize everything. Like I could track the numbers on social media, through ads, all of these analytics. But when it came to preparing the actual content and looking for the insights, it kind of felt very bare. Like, and it felt to me like, people who were outside of the space weren't really getting that problem because they never experienced it per se. And then we also had this unique situation where I was literally sitting next to a tech person and I could complain all day about how big of an issue this was for me. And so it was kind of a mix of getting good feedback, getting users on board, but also us just really believing in the idea. Maybe very naively and very optimistically, but there was just very profound belief that it could.
I think you actually said something. Most of the startup advice wouldn't say you should not fall in love with your idea. At least like you should have this parallel data track and interview process, and you're like conducting an experiment rather than building a product. But I think what you said also additionally is you validated the problem. And that is the most important thing. So your solution might change along the way, but I think this is something that every startup advice would tell you. Like if the problem is real, there will be, so if people feel the pain and they're willing to pay for it.
But it always helps when you, as a founder, have experienced that same pain. That's what every investor will always say, that because people investing are investing in founders first, that if you yourself did not experience this problem, didn't have this pain, you're not, it's harder for you. You have to talk to a lot more people to really empathize with their problem and actually get that. So I think that that's a pretty cool story in terms of how that developed, and it does explain to me actually where the bravery came from, because when you really want to solve something, there's nothing really stopping you to do that, I think we
fell more in love with solving the problem than just the product itself. We were very open to changing the product. You know, we were super open. Even today when users write to us, there are some things that we felt like, yeah, maybe this wouldn't be such a good feature like for us as a product, but when we talk to users and hear the use case and their reasoning behind why this is necessary to them, we're very quick to change our opinion if there's really some valid basis for it. So I think that that's probably better, to fall in love with solving some core problem that people have. You know, products can change, they evolve. For us, it was always very hard when people ask us, are you an AI startup? We use AI to help users, but it's not the core of what we do. So, there's always conflicting advice, but if you fall in love with the problem, it's much better than falling in love with, a product that you feel like needs to be built in some way.
And at which point did you, was it global from the first day, or where the majority of your users now, and where were they at that when you started?
I think that, kind of, because all of these people that we spoke to that were like super early users were from all over the world, but we didn't really have a plan to go global, but simply because we were using like social media, we were active on our blog, we used Product Hunt, that was really good for us in the early days. We simply didn't really have geographical control, so people started coming from all over the place, and then we started noticing patterns. So like mostly in like North America, we had one influencer now like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, do like a video in Brazil in Portuguese. So like it was very specifically for Brazil, and we still have an active user base there, even though there hasn't been any like targeting messaging there. Also, I think in like Korea, because there's a competitor that has like ads or something that's bothering people, so then they Google alternatives. But yeah, when we look at that map on Intercom, we can see almost every country has at least one or two users there.
That's very impressive. That's very cool.
That's truly global.
Yeah.
Talking about product market fit, where do you stand now when you look at your product?
I think we're getting there. I mean, if you asked me maybe 6 months ago, I would say that we were a bit further away than now. But for the past 3 months, we really started to see not just like the user numbers grow, but also the usage of the app grow. Because we track, how many snippets, how many comments, how many all of these things are happening with the app. And I would say we're on the road to get there. We're kind of very typical startup that's between pre-seed and seed. We're getting to those very solid use cases. And we're always trying to learn along the way from users what we can do to actually improve that experience to them.
And how are you measuring product market fit? Like, what would be the benchmark where you're saying, like, okay, at this point, we do have product market fit?
When users start organically onboarding other users, that's basically for us, because we feel this is a collaborative
like network effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we get to that point where it's the first thing you think when you find something useful online is to save it with Collabwriting and share it with someone through Collabwriting, that's when we feel like we're there. And that maybe sounds kind of ambitious to go to that place where, like people think of Grammarly or Loom for very specific things. We want to be that for that kind of link sharing and data collection. And that's when we're going to feel like we're really, really there.
But one question, are you a bit hard on yourself, I would say? Because if I would talk about product market fit, I would say that it's a product users are using continuously. It solves their problem. They're willing to help to pay for it, to retention is high. I would say that this other part where they are onboarding other users might be next stage.
Yeah, but in the early days when we were getting to like 100 users, that was the goal. Like to have people actively using the app was the goal. And I don't know, I think that when you're a founder, you just have like these rolling goals. So it was like when we were just starting out, for us, it was like when we get to 100 users that are active weekly, that's when we have it. And then when we came to 1,000 users, that was it. Now that we are approaching bigger numbers, then kind of we were aiming towards those higher goals. And I think that, I don't know, we are very happy with what we've done, but this kind of goal of having something that's bigger than us is kind of moving us to be more ambitious with how we approach things.
But it's interesting to me. I feel like what you're saying is more like getting to that growth stage rather than necessarily being in the early stage. Whereas I don't know if are you currently, I'm sure you're measuring in some way or another churn and sort of drop off in usage and all of that. Like with product market fit, I feel like, as Zoya said, there's a big part of it is are the users happy? How much are they using the product? Are they sharing it or not? But a big part of it is what happens if you take away that product, and also how many people like are churning. So can you talk a little bit, how are you measuring retention, and is that a big part of your strategy right now?
Yeah, I mean, we still don't have a massive paying user base. So for us, it was also tracking free users, how active they are, how often they're using the app, but also tracking just that very basic number of how many people have registered and how many people are actually active on the app. And with that, we feel like we're actually doing pretty good. Over 50% of people that ever registered, that are still active users. Awesome. And that's by numbers that we have from like the Edge Store and the Chrome Web Store. So these are not just our numbers.
I would say that's a good number.
Yeah.
Yeah, that feels like a good number, but we feel like there was a lot of space not to just have them active, but be fully immersed with the app. So that was one thing that we were attempting to do at the end of last year. So not just have people use us occasionally, but actually for us to become a habit to them. And that's why, for example, this move from not just being available on desktop to mobile was really important, because we felt like that's where we would break their workflow. Like you would find something interesting on your phone and then you could collect it. And then you would send it to yourself on Slack or Messenger or wherever, but you wouldn't be using Collabwriting. So that's why we were thinking of also doing the app, but this Edge kind of beta program was really great because we got to test out and see if people are really, really interested in using this on their phones as well.
And if you don't mind sharing, like, what's the sort of, how good are you currently at upselling people to paid
We're still
plans?
working on that.
Okay.
I mean, we would mostly have people who would initially buy the team version and then stay there, because we really don't have those loops yet where we track your activity and then can send you pings and emails and offers. But for us, because we saw that we were lacking in that activity and that engagement last year, we wanted to first focus on that, to get people fully invested in the app, and then this is the next step for us. That's why I say that I don't think we're still really there with the product fit.
What I just realized is that we are now, the whole conversation, we are talking about the process, and I'm to blame. I can say that I started like thinking about what is product market fit, how do we, and we said we don't want to be those people, you know, no BS, like whatever you call it, it doesn't matter. I mean, I think even at one of our joint episodes with Alex, you and me, we talked how basically you are in this product market fit all the time, looking for a product market fit all the time. But you should always be alert. What are the things you should change? But
that's why I asked, how do you measure it? Because it's an interesting thing for me. I feel like for different startups, and especially when you are in a product-led growth scenario, it's a little bit different. But definitely, you know, how many people are ready to pay for your product is a big marker of that. What do you think is really like stopping you right now from going in there and actually focusing on acquiring more paid users?
Getting the dollars.
Time. I mean, I think that for us last year, it was that friction that we were still causing for users, and then didn't make sense to make a huge push towards, you know, trying to get as much money from users as possible. But now when we're kind of in a better place just with the app itself, it feels like that's going to be the next quarter for us, where we actually sensibly do that. Because it felt like since we're still a small team, we would be wasting energy trying to push something that didn't want to be pushed. And now when we feel more pull from users, we have users that like got the team app, the team version, and are asking us about like, do you have enterprise? We started running some test ads on LinkedIn and got a lot of engagement with some where people started chatting with each other on the problems they have and the problems that the tool can solve, and are curious about how they can upgrade and what they can do. Now it feels like we're in a place where we're piquing curiosity for users, where they're going to visit that section of the app more to see how they can upgrade, where we have more this positive feedback. And like we still have enough runway to be able to do all of these things. I mean, that's also maybe a bit of a luxury that we can afford that for ourselves, but it just makes more sense now versus 6 months ago.
And are you still actively talking with your users? And are you talking to them about whether or not and what would make them, switch to the plan? Maybe you can talk. The reason I'm asking is a lot of people who would be interested in and who listen to our podcast are probably in the same predicament as you are. They have an idea, they are growing, they have users, but I think that for a founder, it's that moment when you start making, more revenue, when you can actually be self-sustainable, when you become profitable, is like the dream, So how to get there, and what are the things that currently you're doing to ensure that once you do have the time and you can prioritize this, that you're in the right space for that?
I mean, one thing is that we're now much more meticulous about tracking the numbers, but we also now, with the volume of users, have many more users reaching back to us. So we had one user, there was like this bug where if you didn't have a last name, it wouldn't always let you log in. And he was so invested that he reached out to us during the weekend at some, God knows what hour. And he wrote to us, and then we went through kind of the back and forth of solving that bug, but then he came back with suggestions, and he was like, I've been very invested, I've been trying to add a lot of things, I've been trying to onboard my team, but there are these 2-3 things that are missing for me. So we also kind of look at the quality of feedback, the investment of someone in the app and the actual use case to see if it's actually worthwhile taking in that feedback and changing what we have planned. Because there's a lot of people, especially now, who are super curious about AI or new tools or whatever, and a lot of people have a lot of opinions. But for us, it's always weighing this, how active is actually this person? Have they used competitors? Are they really in the space to actually buy a product like this? Or just someone who likes to share their opinion on new apps and new things that are happening? Both can be valuable for different things, but it's much easier to make your decision based on someone who's very invested in the app and solving the problem versus someone who's a casual user who might, come to the app once or twice a month. So for us, it's been kind of this balance of, okay, look at the numbers, what actually are users using, what they're doing, where we cause friction for them, where we see that there are bugs and issues, and then also talking to actual individuals who come back with feedback and respond to a new update or a new even newsletter or whatever we put out, or just reach out to us through our intercom. And that's been very, very valuable.
And I'm curious, when we were talking about this, I realized that I want to ask maybe it's more of a personal question in a way, but you as a founder, have you had a situation where, for example, you really believed in a certain feature or a certain thing that should be on the roadmap, and then based on the feedback that you realized, okay, maybe we shouldn't do this, but you felt really attached emotionally to this? Have you had situations like this where you had to maybe make decisions that were that you were
counterintuitive to you?
Yeah.
Counterintuitive, yes, but nothing that was super disappointing, because we're not. I personally am not so invested in the structural part. The thing that I'm most invested in is when people reach back to us and say, you saved us this much time, you gave us this value. And that was we would have these, even when we started, that was the biggest motivator. One guy found us on LinkedIn. We had no connection to him prior. And he was I was looking for this for the past 6 months. I couldn't find something like this. You guys have, saved me so much time. So whenever people come back with, this work or doesn't, or we see that something is not a good fit, it just kind of feels like a stepping stone. Maybe because I'm not a technical person.
Yeah.
I don't have this, deep attachment to a feature or a segment of the app. It's much more oriented to, are we helping someone solve a problem?
I think it's related to what you said before. You fell in love with the problem.
Yeah.
So you're now just looking for the best solution to fix the problem rather than the solution. But I just want to go now. I think we're reversing your way, which is fun. So from how did you grow, actually? How do you get users? How did that guy from LinkedIn found you? How do people find Collabwriting?
Yeah, what are the main channels, and what are they now, and what were they in the beginning?
Thank you, marketing person.
No.
I mean, that guy specifically found us through Product Hunt once we launched the first time. So in those early days, we started using social media. We started writing our newsletter quite early. And we also started having an active blog quite early because that was kind of my comfort zone. I knew how to do that. It felt like, you know, we don't have a lot of money, but let's use the skills that we have on hand. And then we started testing out those different channels. Like when we launched on Product Hunt, we really weren't sure if people were going to be interested in a tool like Collabwriting. So our first action was to launch an ebook, and that had helped us get to like 300-400, email addresses of people who were interested, and we could kind of ping those people back once we launched officially the product. And also you have that page where people follow you. If they upvoted, they're automatically a follower. So that helped us build some sort of following there. And that was the first way that we actually got that kind of initial bigger user base. And then it just kind of went step by step from there. We continued investing in our like organic presence. We continued and did a couple of other launches on Product Hunt. We did one launch on AppSumo that was just limited personal pro.
Sorry, I want to stop you. When you say like organic, you invested a little bit in that. Like, what are the things that you do? Like, is it SEO? Is it content? Like, just because again, I feel like I understand it, but I want to know specifics.
We produce content for our LinkedIn primarily, and we also write blogs. Like we write 4 blogs a month. It's not super like crazy, but we also have our company newsletter, and then we also have this other newsletter that's more specifically targeted at people who are just interested in our ebooks. So we do these couple of things, and we have a person in-house that does all of this. So she's our community manager, but when she was hired, it was basically like up for grabs, whatever you want as a title, because she was the first person we hired. And she had, I think, the worst pitch for a job ever. Like, we don't know if we're going to exist in like 6 months. We don't know what we're going to do. We really don't know if the startup is going to exist. They want to come work with us. And she said yes.
Oh, that's the right person to hire in a startup.
Yeah.
So your first hire outside of you and your co-founder was a marketing person?
Yeah, it was like a communications person. Because we knew this was a place that we could utilize for growth. And, we all had very low salaries. So in terms of like the cost, it just made the most sense to have someone that could help us grow. Like my co-founder could build, I could manage all of these like applications, grants, pitches, things like that we needed for like that fundraising process and the operational side. And then even though she was a junior, like I could do more like the strategic planning, working with her, and then she could do more of the operational things. But she helped out with whatever, like whenever we would do a launch, whenever we were writing anything, whenever we were doing anything, she would be there to help out.
I love this. I love this conversation. Maybe because it's similar to my journey as well, because I also had a technical co-founder and I was dealing with like more operation stuff, the business stuff, marketing as well. And that's why the first person we hired was like a demand generation person. She was more focused on sales because we were selling to bigger enterprises. So we needed a salesperson as well. But she was doing a little bit of everything and writing content as well. And I thought it worked really well because it allowed us to grow really quickly in a short period of time rather than wait until we built a completely perfect product. We actually hired the second person we hired was a data scientist because we're building also something.
Also interesting, when we were talking with Fishing Booker founders, they also mentioned that they not just first several hires were marketing/sales people.
Yeah. I do think that it allows you to jumpstart that growth rather than necessarily wait till the product.
And I think it's a mindset issue. It's a mindset thing. Like, what is the main thing you should be doing? You should be getting out to talk to the customers, building this customer base even when the product is not ready. Yeah. So the founders with that mindset, they are the ones who hire people who will get them faster to the customers. Yeah. While most tech founders have this counterintuitive thing, like we need to build it first before we can even show it to anyone.
But I think it's because they are comfortable with that. They're like, the users are not coming because the product is not perfect. And they're like, I'll do what I know best. I think that's what most, and actually maybe we are skewed as well because we're like, we understand marketing, so we will do this. But that's why it's good when you have a technical and a non-technical founder. It's actually, I think, the best I mean, I'm not inventing something new here, but I think it is the best combination because it is balanced approach. Because otherwise, you're always sort of tipping the scale into the other direction.
And I think for us, because our product was very quickly usable, like it wasn't perfect, it wasn't, anything revolutionary, but that, highlight, click, locate was available very early on. So for us, it made a lot of sense to go out and see if anybody's going to use this, if people are going to stick with this. And then it also made sense to, have someone who was going to be there in-house doing the work with us to bring this in front of users.
And one thing, so your co-founder, he's a tech person, but he's a repeated founder. He had an exit before, right? The startup you were working in. And for me, it was interesting. It was one of your, let's say, you were in a corporate for a short time, and then you went as a junior to this startup. You were actually the first marketing hire, right?
Yeah, first full-time marketing hire. They worked externally with people, but they never had anyone in-house.
Okay, and one thing why I'm asking this is it means that your co-founder actually had this also marketing/business mindset. If they were able to build a product and get to the users without a marketing person, somebody had to be aware of this whole biz dev. So how is it working with somebody who's already been there, done that? Do you see some changes in how you approached when working in this first startup, you as an employee, and now you as a co-founder?
I mean, it wasn't really that big of a switch when we started working in Collabwriting, because I started working kind of early on in that startup. I spent almost 4 years there, and by the end of it, it felt like it was my own company, even though I didn't have ownership of it. Yeah. But when you spend such a long time somewhere, and it's a small team, and it's that startup atmosphere, you start kind of feeling like you're building something of your own. So when we switched to working on Collabwriting, the dynamic didn't really shift much, but I think that we had to learn a lot from it. Like, we had a lot of experiences with that company. When COVID hit, we lost one of our biggest clients, and then we went through an acquisition, and through this kind of change, just being like a singular startup to now being more integrated in a corporate environment. So there was a lot of experience we had, and then kind of the challenges we faced with Collabwriting seemed a bit easier because of this joint experience of a lot of stress. All of it, it wasn't, always perfect or great. We didn't really, before we officially closed our fundraising, we really didn't have a lot of money. Like, after we won the prize, our breakfast was at Lidl in Romania because we had so little money. Yeah. So a lot of those moments were stressful, but it made it much easier because we had joint experience of going through stress and knowing that we had a lot of similar shared values when it came to building a company. So even if you have like a disagreement on, like a feature or a direction or something, that the baseline is there. So you're not going to split, because of some minor disagreement or because something just popped up. So I think that was the biggest difference I think I saw, maybe comparing to working with someone that you don't really previously know. And I think that for him, a lot of experience showed in the way he works with people, manages people. So that's probably been a very good thing with how you structure the development, how you work with people in development, how you motivate them. So I think that's where we saw the biggest difference.
And in terms of like your approach to marketing and growth, how much did it change as a marketing only person in a company to a co-founder? Do you see some things differently now?
Yeah, I think it's much easier to sweat this little stuff when that's your only focus. And then when you're kind of in this bird's eye view position where you have to tackle all of these different things, like in one day you're tackling, invoices and investors and your team and all sorts of different things, and then marketing a smaller bit of it, you don't see like a small error in such a big way, I think.
Yeah, so sorry, no, I'm like agreeing with you.
So I think that was the difference. And then more seeing this connection between how we do our communications and how we work on our products. So just really seeing fully that kind of space where we're collecting the feedback also from social media and how people respond to different things in our newsletters, product updates, all of these things. I think that now in the position of a co-founder that has some marketing experience in the background, I see that connection much more.
to me, it's very interesting, and I'm like,
she's gonna say again, it's very similar to how
it
went
is,
for me.
it is in a way,
we'll
but
have to like think of something to punish you for the next time you say that.
No, actually, I was thinking more that it's very often, I think that when you're a founder of a startup, you realize that it's harder to prioritize what you thought was the most important thing. It doesn't matter whether it's marketing or anything else. I, right now, as a founder of a offline business, I often like have nightmares about the fact that marketing is our weakest point right now. Because I'm always kind of putting out other fires. There's always something that's more of a priority. In an offline world, it's even more specific, where you can't just say like, oh, I'll plan something for the next quarter. But, you know, I've learned to make peace with that, to be like, okay, well, this is, you know, it is what it is right now. I'll find a way to solve it later. But I think that...
You should have. Who was your first hire? Do you have a marketing hire?
Yes. Well, it's a good question actually, because it was me and partners. My partner, she's like a mix between marketing and operations. Because when we started, to be honest, it was an offline business, so we had no idea. Like I wanted to invent titles that are similar to a tech startup, but it's a bit different because then you suddenly have office managers and all this. Now we're going into a whole other world. But I thought, why would I hire a marketing person when I can do this in the beginning? And then it snowballed where it's now sort of divided by with different people.
Everyone is doing a little bit of marketing.
A little bit. I think it's also, for me, it's very hard to hire marketing people. I don't know how about you, but like for me, I always am the most demanding when it comes to marketing because I'm like very judgy on like, oh, this is not good.
Is there a tip you can
give?
I mean,
to me.
For us?
And to some others who are definitely struggling.
For us, I think the biggest reason why we hired Guardana, who is our community manager, is because her skill set was so diverse and she just looked like a person that really wanted to learn. Like she didn't have a marketing background almost at all when we hired her. She has a degree in literature. She worked on like different projects where she will be like the marketing team. But what she had done was like she had her own successful like Instagram page, now also TikTok, where she shares like tips and things about history and literature. And she also shot her own documentary on her phone. And that was presented like in Belgrade, I think also in Ljubljana and also a few other cities here in Serbia. So she was very motivated to learn, and she was a very creative person. She also spoke English and wrote in English really well, which was important to us, but that was more like a technical thing that we needed from a person. And she just felt like someone that you could really easily work with. Like, you know, she didn't have everything off the bat that we needed in a marketing person, but she felt like someone who was super eager to learn, super capable of learning. Like that's also a skill that you can, you know, retain knowledge and be able to learn from feedback and not have an issue when like I don't have time and I'm just like correcting things. She never takes offense to that, which is really great because you just don't always have time.
She made a documentary with a phone, so she knows how to do it.
She's very resourceful also. So I think that for us, that was a really big thing for that early hire, that she was resourceful, she was ready to learn, and just that baseline skill of knowing how to write in English was, you know, simply important to us for the type of business.
So like if there is, so it helps to hire a junior person and to be that, let's say, when you know marketing and you know what should be done. But if we imagine, which is very common, 3 engineers starting a startup, they listen to this podcast, they say, okay, I understand it, I should get a marketing hire. What would be your advice? What would you do?
Someone who had different roles. Like, I think it would be very hard if you've been specialized for a number of years to then switch to marketing. Someone who's, like, my background was also doing like NGO projects before I went to this corporate after I graduated for a few months. someone who has that background of having to be resourceful, having to work with little resources.
Scrappy.
Yeah, even if their roles weren't necessarily in marketing, they have some marketing experience, but they've done anything else. Like even like an office manager who had to do a lot of things at once. I think that can be very helpful in hiring someone that's going to be a good fit for a marketing team in a startup. And also someone who can learn quickly, so you can see through conversation, maybe through their working history, because you have to be able to, at least on a basic level, understand what's happening with the technology, with the product, with the things that are happening, and have some curiosity towards that field. So that would be my advice, look at someone who maybe had some of the general roles, if not, who maybe had like this diverse background where they were in a position to have to do a bunch of different things at the same time, whichever position that was. And if you have this kind of baseline requirement, ask for that. But I think that this is probably the biggest thing for that early hire that you need.
I 100% agree. I would just add maybe on top of that, if there's 3 engineers and you're hiring a marketer, you do want somebody who's going to be able to challenge you and tell you, no, we should do this, because that's something that often marketers are not always good at. I feel like they want, a lot of them are in a way people pleasers. I don't know if that's maybe necessarily the right word for this, but they
go with the flow.
They go with the flow, or they want to solve a problem. So I even sometimes, like when I was younger, I was like that. Somebody would bring me a problem and I'll be like, oh, I can solve this problem, without asking, is this the problem that we should be solving, actually? And I think that this is something that in a startup environment, you should hire somebody who will tell you, you know what, I'm not sure that this is the problem we should solve. Maybe we should look at this.
But I have to say, this is the most important thing every marketer in a startup should be asking. Is this a problem worth solving? Are we sure we want to do this? And I think this is what separates talking about like marketing in any other company, especially big corporation with large budgets, to what you're doing as a marketing person in a startup. And I don't know if you would agree, but my most, like if I had to do a blank advice, I would say not to hire a marketing person who worked in a large corporate.
But I worked, for example, and she worked in a corporation.
But she moved.
I worked in a corporate for a very short time, like 3-4 months.
She left the corporate very quickly.
But I think that the biggest challenge there is that you're used to working with very different resources.
Exactly.
And it's very important to be clear on expectations. Like if you go to a startup that has 5 people, you're not going to have the budget for everything.
Exactly.
And you're not going to have the person for everything.
And you're not going to have a designer, probably. It will be you and the Canva. And I'm talking like an underfunded early stage startups. If we are talking about, I don't know, enterprise focused VC-backed startup, that might be a good person for you. But even like what I notice here, what I think that people who have worked for a long time in a corporate, and for you it was different. You didn't work to promote a corporate product. You were actually, Blanca, I'm talking about you, you were actually bringing something new that that the corporate was doing. So it was also a different.
But when I worked for SAP, actually, I worked, in a product that was super established, and it was a little bit different. I was brought in as a little bit as a disruptor in a way, because we were doing strategic projects. But I think that I both agree and disagree with you. I would say it like this.
That's a good conversation.
I think
Sandra will decide. I'm kidding.
She'll break even. I do think that when you have a lot of resources, it spoils you in a way, and it depends how adaptable you are when you go from a lot of resources to no resources, and how freaked out you are by that. But I think that if you are a problem solver and a scrappy person from like the get-go, and yes, of course, if you have not worked 20 years in a corporate, but I worked for 2.5 years, I think it's just important inherently. Are you focused on like, oh, why would we do this if it makes sense to spend less and do something that's better? I was like a super impatient person in a corporate. I was like, we should do this faster. And they're like, no, but we have all the time in the world. I'm like, no, why would we wait? And I think it's like when you're younger, you're that way. But the good part about working in a corporate is that you know what success looks like. You know what where you're supposed to get to at some point with your startup. Because
Interesting point.
I think when you are a founder and you have no experience in the corporate, eventually you'll have to step away to bring somebody in, oftentimes, because you get overwhelmed with like how to build these processes, what this should feel like, what should we like prioritize, how we should hire, how we should grow, and you realize that you've outgrown. The business is growing faster than you are, and I think that that's the. It doesn't happen always, but I feel like the corporate experience really helps you understand, okay, I'm not scared because I know where I need to get to, what the success will look like in the end.
I think it's also the quality of that experience that determines it a lot. So I think it would be very different to hire someone from a corporate that has innovative communications and is really striving to be very good at it versus someone who worked in a very traditional setting where it was more like, we do this because we know we have to, but we're not really innovating, we're not really changing. This is like an operational thing almost. And then if you spend a really long time there, you have the resources, you're kind of going through the steps and the motions. I think it can be very hard to switch from that mindset to a startup mindset. And then there are just some things that are luxuries in the startup space, which is just having free time in a very expected way. Like, you know, you're going to finish at 5, you know, you have weekends free, you know that these things are just solid versus, you know, on the other hand, in startups also having the freedom to do a lot of different things that you didn't have before. So I think it very depends on the corporate, and it very depends on your role in the corporate. Because also if you worked as like a CMO for 10 years and now you have to step back and go back to writing blogs, writing posts, doing these very operational things, it can be a very big switch. And it can also be an added cost to the startup because you're hiring someone who's senior, that person is not happy because their job is not something that's necessarily challenging for them. It's not something that's fulfilling for them. So I think that someone who's like in this media space where they have the sense of what's happening in the marketing space, how to kind of do all these things, but is still open to learning and growing and very hungry and ambitious. I think that's kind of the middle ground.
And especially like, just to add, I think if we have to agree on something, I would say that if you're hiring somebody from corporate, you should be alert to those kinds of things because sometimes even it sounds good. Oh, that person worked in Coca-Cola. Awesome. So that they must have a lot of experience, but it's really like something that you have to double check as you would check if that person worked in a company you knew nothing about.
And the roles can be very specialized. So if you worked for a long time in a very specialized role, it can then be hard to switch to a generalist role.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that even that much, but I think because we all agree on it. It's really hard. It's really, I think that's a really good point. You should have somebody who's done a lot of different things and has this wide perspective.
I would bring in more confusion. I probably at this point would not hire a person from a corporate if that's
okay, ladies. This means I won. We just spent 5 minutes talking
I would
about
just
it.
say I would just say I would hire. I mean, depends on the stage, but if it was my first marketing hire, I don't have a problem with hiring with somebody who has corporate experience. But if they have no other experience,
I agree.
That's a red flag.
It can be difficult to make that transition.
And I think even, especially in some markets, some early stage ecosystems, it's hard to find people who've actually done marketing and done some things that wasn't like a corporate or traditional company. So we should have that in mind as well. But okay, we did all the...
for the benefit of our
We circled
audience.
back, but good.
But now let's shift gears. And actually, I wanted to ask you, right now, what are some of the challenges you have? And actually, one of the things we wanted to do, because you're our first guest who is in the midst of trying to get to this growth stage, and maybe we can be somehow helpful, give you like a different perspective on something. What are some of the challenges you're facing right now? And how are you, tell us a bit, how are you thinking about them? How are you trying to solve them? And then we'll go from there.
I mean, I think that just this ongoing challenge of activating fully users and bringing them to the point where collaborating is a habit, not just something they use occasionally. And also those growing pains that we kind of see in the future of going from a small compact team of 8 people to potentially becoming a bigger team, to potentially not all being in Serbia, working with like a more diverse kind of group of people who are all over the world. I think those are some things that we have on our plate kind of waiting for us in the future. So now we're working on this activation part. It seems like it's going okay, but what's the next step, how do we do it most efficiently, and then once we're in that kind of more growth stage, how do we actually optimize that growth of the team, not just the product.
And so what are your current thoughts on this? What are you trying to, like, let's take the first part of it in terms of making Collabwriting something that people use every day and scaling that product. What do you think would be a good strategy to do that? What are your current thoughts?
Right now, we're trying to optimize our onboarding as much as we can, because we've also seen that if people come to a certain number of like actions, they're much more likely to stay with the app. So that's what we're trying to optimize, to push people more towards becoming engaged themselves versus just us, sending them email and being informative, to more being action-based. And then that's also the part of user interviews, improving the product, giving people actually the tools that they need to be able to use us on a daily basis. So those were kind of the steps that we're taking now, but it's, always feels like you can do a bit more in that space. It was a process to really pinpoint those things that are key for the user. That's kind of what was our focus in the last quarter of last year. We went through offsites with some of our investors. We went through a couple conferences, a couple of things that were really valuable in terms of learning. And then we had to kind of sit down, put all of that on kind of paper and see what the key learnings were, what we can apply, what were the key issues, and then create like a list of what we need to do.
I want to make sure this is useful for other people who are maybe in a different industry. And how can they go about if they are in the same situation that you are right now and they're trying to grow, besides maybe talking to their users, which is, I think, is key, what are some of the other ways that they can make these decisions on the onboarding, product-led growth, acquiring more users, growth?
But you also mentioned, sorry, she already mentioned, so you can add more details, that your co-founder is also tracking how users behave within the app. So what are other things you measured?
One thing that was also a very good learning point for us were past competitors. And we would hear about this from users, but we would go and see what were the reasons why people were unhappy. Like for a lot of those, you still have like an extension and then the reviews, but we would also try to look at the product and what we felt was kind of off. So like one product got really expensive because they added like a whole text editor. And then, yes, was it valuable for people to be able to capture things and then edit them? Sure, but were people willing to pay for that? From the feedback that we got, not really. So then we, instead of developing our own editor, we just did an integration with Google Docs where you can drag and drop things and make it, almost as seamless as with that product, just not having to have a higher price point because we're now handling a lot more technically on the back end. Then there were also products that try to utilize AI in very early stages, but it can be very hard with snippets of information to sort them just with AI. Because like one sentence can be related to so many things. Like the number of cars in Belgrade can be related to like a report on like the state of ecology and whatever in Serbian, how much people are aware of that. On like the purchasing power, it can be also like a data point on the habits of people and what transportation they use. It can be so many different things. And if we had tried to do that in the early days, it would cost us a lot. Users were not happy with some of the solutions that they were getting. And our own data would not be as relevant as it is right now for what we have planned in the future. So we were trying to look at those things, like not even people who were our users, but other people's users and the feedback and their websites and why some things failed, to learn what were kind of the pitfalls that we shouldn't be going towards for.
Is there something that you would like to ask us, actually, when it comes to growing a startup, building products, growing user base? Is there something that's like...
What's the biggest pitfall that people fall into when they're in this stage? Because you guys have worked in startups that are in the same stage that we are now. What is the one thing that we all forget and then it bites us in the ass after a year or two?
Do you want to do first? Or I have so many that I talk about.
Yeah, there are many, but the one I think I already mentioned in our conversation, and that's the most common, is overbuilding the product, overbuilding the features. And I think it's also very hard to focus on the most important thing that you're building. And I think you gave several great examples, like not doing a text editor, because that's not your main pain point. The main pain point of your users is like solving how to map out all of the things you are want to use for your content, for any type of content or writing. So in that sense, I see a lot of startups overbuilding their products and trying to build all in one place, like instead of starting out with a single feature or a small set of features. And even when you look at some of the most popular startups, they grew out of this. We can use your startup as an example, which I also think is one reason why we've invited you out of all of those pre-seeds or seed startups, because we think you are on a good track to skip all those mistakes that you're already. So you mentioned in several ways falling in love with the product, not in a solution. That's a big one, where people are trying to fit their solution into a problem rather than the other way around. So that would be for me.
Yeah. I think for me, it's more like especially if we're talking about growth, I think that I often notice that when startups are very scrappy in the beginning and they're really good at scarce resources, they don't know how to get to this like leap where we need to start spending money, we need to be bolder, we need to actually grow at this point. And I think that's why I asked you what's stopping you from like making money off users more and you really, double down. Because I think when we were also talking with Fish and Booker, that's what they talked about. You need to identify when there is like a big pull, and then you need to go. Yeah. And I think the startups sometimes are in this stage like, oh, well, let's talk more to the users, which is nothing bad in a certain stage, but at this point, being bold enough and willing to bet money, resources, all of this to grow. And I think that makes or breaks the startups that actually get to this unicorn status, because a lot of people build great products, a lot of people even figure out and hack a certain channel, but in order to this, like sometimes a speed and the boldness and like the resources you put at it really matter, but it's figuring out at which
But I would say, I agree with that, but sometimes even those bets can be different bets, starting with several different bets, but putting more resources on it. That's exactly what once startups are in your phase, like
knowing which bet to take.
Yes.
Or taking two bets.
Yeah, knowing when to do it.
Putting money on it, like putting other resources and scaling the effort on that. I think you're right.
Yeah. Not being afraid to risk stuff, because I think...
And lose money.
Exactly, yes. You'll have to, I always talk about, I've had a lot of mistakes I've done as a startup founder. I feel like I made more mistakes than I made good bets, but some of the good bets were really... It paid off. So not trying to play on the safe side, I think, is an important thing.
I think that was kind of the conclusion that we came at the end of last year, because that was like the time when we decided we were going to niche down and have a very narrow focus. What was the core thing that we wanted to solve with this product? And that was also when we made a decision to kind of continue with PLG growth, not go to like typical B2B sales at that time, because we felt like, would we be possibly able to sell this to companies and kind of start that slower kind of progression? Yes, but do we feel like there's more potential in building this product that, we could potentially double our user base in 3 months? We believe that we could potentially do it. So that's kind of where we had to make that call. But even in those early days when we raised money, like it was such a big switch from being super scrappy, like very little grant money, to then actually having the funds. And like I would have to correct myself. Like it's not productive to spend 4 hours just looking for the most affordable hotel wherever we're traveling. Like you can just choose something that's reasonable and that's fine. You don't have to think about every single cost. And now we're kind of gotten to that place where if it saves us time, it's fine. If we feel like this is going to generate growth for us, it's very reasonable to spend money on it.
Sorry, there is one other thing that I see sometimes in startups is when most of their user base are free users, they tend to be afraid to lower some of their benefits and to start getting more, testing with getting more of them to paid, because once that happens, for sure, they will get smaller numbers. They will lose customers. You will get some angry emails, feedbacks, or even you will start feeling less confident. But I think this is something that has to be done. And I love one example in the local ecosystem. It's Active Collab. It's not that same, but they did. They're a really old, but if we compare it to digital products, I think they're more than 15 years old. And they had this standalone product where you buy a software and you use it. And then at one point, they decided they said, okay, now it's going to be a subscription-based thing. And they lost a lot of money in the beginning because you had people paying in advance larger sums. But eventually, they ended up on a better outcome for themselves. And if they stayed on this track, actually, when you look at it from this perspective, it's a matter of time when they would end up having no users, because now everyone is so used to paying monthly. But in that moment when they decided
it was a tough choice.
It was a tough choice. And I think that's a tough choice that startups need to start making. How am I going to earn from my customers? And one other thing, now it's even more important than ever because of the funding landscape, which is in such a decline. I think more than 40% year over year startup decline was 23 to 24. And I think we don't still have the data for, but it's really, really troubling. And I think everyone is looking to see if startups can survive on their own. And only if they can survive on their own, they will throw money at it to make them survive better and earn something for investors.
Yeah, makes sense. And I think it's always a big part of what you were saying is how you communicate the value, because I don't know if you heard, there's this big backlash of Netflix raising the price and not communicating what was the previous price, what's happening, all of this.
And Gumroad, there was a whole. So don't do it like a Gumroad did.
And I think that
there was even Canva that they got such bad feedback that they reduced the prices again.
Yeah. But I think that's an actually interesting case, because that's what we're talking about in terms of that fear, and when you're not sure actually what decisions you're making, why you're making them, and how you're communicating them. Because when the people value your product and the pain is big enough, unfortunately, but it's true, they're ready to pay a lot of money. So they might be unhappy, there might be people that leave, but the ones that are your ICP is actually how you know whether you have an ICP, because when it's free, it's still nice to have for people. They're using it, they can, but if they're willing to bet money on it and pay for it, then that's different. So I think that in the end, I want to always say it's you're supposed to communicate it correctly, but I think you have to spend money in order to earn money. We always say this. So I feel that's our long answer to this question.
No, I completely agree. I think that there was definitely that kind of trigger point for us where we realized that, and also that kind of learning curve that it's okay to actually spend, because there is also, I think, a little bit of that mindset even locally in the ecosystem. Be frugal, be more conservative with your plans, but that's not really something that's even expected from you as a startup in this stage. If you raise a certain amount of money, it's expected. It's 18 to 24 months. You do as much as you can in that time frame. So I think that that's just something that you have to have that switch flipped in your head when you go from bootstrapped or very little funding to actually having money as a tool at your disposal.
Cool.
I would just say that we will be cheering for you for sure. It's tough challenges, but I think they are getting easier as you move past the timeline, the 18 to 24 months.
If you were to imagine that we meet in a year from now, where would you like to be? Maybe we'll do a little bit of manifesting, where would you like to be, and what does success look like in a year from now?
20,000 users, 4 or 5 companies that we feel are like flagship users, people where we feel like we really nailed the use case, and a team that has still kind of kept that essence of the values we have now. Those are the 3 things. I have no idea how big of a team we're going to need at that time, but those are the 3 things. 20,000 users is my next kind of milestone in my head that we need to get to. And also having these 5, 6 really, really good use cases, flagship use cases, that, lighthouse customers that we've been calling them. That's what we want to have in a year.
Cool. Let's cheer to that.
Yes.
That's a very ambitious goal. Hope you get there, and we'll
7x grow.
Yes.
I've
Cheers.
calculated.
Cheers.
So